Last week, Electronic Arts announced plans to be brought out by a group of investors. This group includes three major players: the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, often called PIF, which is essentially the Saudi government's investment arm; Silver Lake, a US-based investment company that has put money into big tech names like Airbnb, Expedia, and Twitter; and Affinity Partners, an investment firm started by Jared Kushner in Miami, which also gets funding from the PIF. The deal is worth $55 billion, making it the biggest all-cash purchase ever in the video game industry. If it goes through, these investors will fully own EA and all of its franchises. Reactions online have been strong and divided. Some creators, myself included, worried that this new ownership could undo the progress EA has made with diversity and inclusion in games like The Sims. That concern comes from the fact that Saudi Arabia has strict laws against LGBTQIA+ people. But what started as a fair concern has quickly blown up into panic and wild rumors. Some people are claiming The Sims 4 will be cancelled or that same-sex marriage will be removed from the game. Others have even used this news to spread anti-Muslim and racist content, which is despicable. But before I go further, I want to be open about who I am. I was born in Lima, Peru, and I moved to the United States as a child. I'm a US citizen, and I came out as bisexual about 3 years ago. My political views are liberal, but I've always believed in respectful conversations across different viewpoints, and I try not to fall into the same biases I criticize in others. So let me be clear, I'm not here to tell you you're wrong for being worried. Your feelings are valid, but I'm here to give you facts and context so we can look at this with perspective, without panic, hate, or jumping to conclusions. So here's what we know so far. EA is moving from being a public company where anyone can buy stock to a private company owned entirely by this group of investors. The investors will pay $210 per share, which is about 25% more than EA's stock was worth when the deal was announced. In other words, it's a good payout for shareholders. To cover the $55 billion, about $36 billion will come directly from the investors, while $20 billion will be borrowed from JP Morgan and Chase. This means that the deal starts off with $20 billion in debt. This kind of financing is common in big buyouts. Even Elon Musk did something similar when he bought Twitter, taking out a $13 billion loan despite having enormous personal wealth. This deal is expected to close between April and June of 2026, which is the first quarter of EA's 2027 fiscal year. EA's headquarters will stay in California, and the current CEO will keep his role. That's what's confirmed. Everything else you're hearing is speculation. So now, let's look at the most common concerns being shared online and address them one by one. It's important to be clear, Electronic Arts has not been sold yet. What's happened is that EA has entered into an agreement to be acquired. That distinction matters. The next step is a shareholder vote. EA's shareholders, the actual owners of the company, must approve the deal. If they vote against it, the sale doesn't go through. The 25% premium being offered makes approval likely, but it's not guaranteed. This decision is in the hands of shareholders, not EA's executives or its studios. Even if the shareholders approve, the deal isn't done. It still has to pass regulatory review. Antitrust officials will examine whether this level of consolidation could harm competition in the industry. And because the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia is a lead investor, the deal could also face geopolitical and national security scrutiny. That may even trigger a review by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. And then there's also the financing to consider. As I said, roughly $20 billion of the purchase is being covered by loans from JP Morgan and Chase. While this is common in large acquisitions, it adds uncertainty. If financial markets shift or the bank decides to pull back, the structure of the deal could collapse, delaying or even stopping the sale altogether. So while acquisition is very likely to happen, it isn't a certainty. The outcome depends on three things: shareholder approval, regulatory clearance, and stable financing. And what would cause financial instability? Perhaps a key franchise of EA being threatened. This has been the most widespread concern online, and while it's understandable given who the potential new owners are, the facts show the likelihood of it happening is very low. For the past 5 years, the Public Investment Fund has already owned about 10% of EA. During that time, The Sims 4 became more inclusive than ever, with updates and expansions that expanded diversity and representation. It's also worth noting that other major shareholders haven't exactly been neutral politically. Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street, three of EA's largest institutional investors, gave more than half of their political donations to Republican candidates during the 2023-2024 election cycle. Vanguard donated 51%, BlackRock 55%, and State Street 59%. And yet none of that shifted EA's trajectory towards inclusivity. The reality is that investment firms are not in the business of pushing ideology. Their goal is to maximize profits. Decisions are driven by money, not politics. Looking more broadly at the gaming industry, publishers like Blizzard and Nintendo often change or censor content in certain regions. They'll tone down violence or remove LGBTQIA+ content to meet local laws. But those changes stay limited to those regions. They don't affect global versions of the game. And The Sims 4 is a perfect example. You can't even buy the game digitally in Saudi Arabia. It's blocked on EA's store and on Amazon, almost certainly because of its inclusive content. Physical copies may exist in local markets, but digital access is essentially banned. So why would new ownership try to strip inclusivity from the game worldwide when it's already unavailable there? Could they create a censored version for Saudi Arabia? Technically, yes, but that would have no impact on the game in other countries. And globally, The Sims 4's audience is clear. 60% female identifying, 20% male identifying, and 20% non-binary fluid or gender diverse. On top of that, about 45% of players identify as non-heterosexual. If EA removed LGBTQIA+ inclusivity, it would devastate the franchise. The community would abandon it. I know I would, and I'm certain many of you would too. That's why it makes no financial sense. The PIF currently owns 33% of the SNK franchise, which has a ton of queer characters. 10% of Nintendo, 4% of Rockstar, and 2% of Activision Blizzard. And as far as I've been able to see, there's been no global influence to remove inclusivity in their franchises. Neither the PIF nor Jared Kushner's firm spent billions, plus billions more in debt financing, just to destroy one of EA's most profitable and culturally important franchises. Investment firms want growth, not collapse. Which brings us to the next major rumor. In 2025, Electronic Arts reported $7.46 billion in net revenue. Of that, $1 billion came from American football games alone. But the biggest driver was live service revenue, which accounted for about $5.5 billion. Within that category, The Sims was specifically highlighted as a major source of growth. Since 2019, The Sims franchise has generated more than $5 billion. It's the 10th best-selling video game franchise of all time, and on Steam, it has consistently ranked among the top 60 most played games since its release on the platform. So if anyone believes the public investment fund or other investors would simply shut down The Sims over moral objections, they're ignoring the facts. The Sims isn't just another EA game. It's a tentpole franchise, one that funds other projects like Dragon Age and EA's Star Wars titles. Removing it would cause a financial collapse across the entire company. There is no scenario where The Sims is cancelled over political or ethical ideology. The franchise is way too valuable. It's a cash cow, and it will continue for as long as it generates massive profits. Speaking of money, are we not playing the same game? This year alone, the Sims team released 12 kits and 3 expansion packs. Remember stuff packs? Game packs? Let's be honest, EA's main goal has always been to make as much money as possible. That hasn't changed. A lot of people are panicking over the $20 billion of debt tied to this acquisition, as if EA suddenly has to claw that money back overnight. But that's not how this works. It's more like a mortgage, structured long-term payments that are already baked into the plan. It doesn't mean EA is suddenly scrambling to pay it off tomorrow. Now, will we see more microtransactions? Probably, but that's not new. The Sims has been kit-focused for the last 2 years. If anything, we're just gonna see more of the same. Instead of 25 kits, we'll get 50. And here's the truth. They make them because we buy them. If the community stopped purchasing, EA would stop producing. It's that simple. So if microtransactions are the reason you want to boycott The Sims, then you're actually feeding into the very next rumor. Yeah, probably. If you're new here, let me give you some context. Outside of creating content, I work a full-time job. And in my professional career, I've been part of several mergers and acquisitions. Here's the reality. People lose jobs. This isn't some unique evil act by EA. It's standard practice whenever a company's finances are being reevaluated. The company needs to look profitable to its investors, and the fastest way to do that is by cutting costs, often through reducing staff. It's awful, and I hate that EA employees are probably anxious about their jobs right now, and they're right to feel that way. But this isn't happening because of the PIF or Jared Kushner. It's simply how the free market works and how companies have always operated. That's why I need to say this clearly. Creators and players who are calling for a boycott right now are only making the situation worse. Boycotts at this moment would almost certainly contribute to job losses for the very people at EA and Maxis who make these games possible. And now is not the time for that. Once we have clear proof or an official statement about where The Sims is heading, then we can act. But doing it now without facts is acting out of fear and ignorance. And let me be clear, I will never support a company that refuses to let me express or represent myself fully. That's why I cut ties with Inzoi, and The Sims won't get a pass if it comes to that. For now though, the best thing we can do is stay vigilant, stay informed, and stop giving power to hate and misinformation. Thank you. So I know I'm probably going to get a lot of comments about how I'm a shill and everything, but I assure you that EA has not talked to me about this whatsoever. No one has been communicated what they should say or anything like that. I thought for a long time if I should say anything at all, simply because I wasn't too informed, but I've spent the week researching and finding out everything that I possibly could, and I felt like now was the time to have a video in which I tell everybody that we need to have cooler heads, and I hope that cooler heads will prevail. And yeah, lore video at the end of the month. It's going to be Halloween themed. I'll see you then.